All right, well, the last couple of classes, I'll tell you, they kind of remind me of like a really nice Greek meal. We started out with the Dark Ages and the Archaic period, and that was like, you know, kind of like a nice spinaca pita appetizer. And then last week, we had Sparta, and that, to me, nice entree, perhaps a little souvlaki, a little gyros. Today, serving up a big, sweet slice of historical baklava, I give you Dr. Joseph Kicklighter.
Wow. Thank you, Frank. Thank you. Well, we have quite a contrast this week from last, I must say that. Last week we talked about the other extreme, Sparta, and its very unusual civilization. This one too is unusual, but in a different way. Athens was both admired and feared, and has gone through the centuries as a symbol of learning. Many of you may remember the quotation from the Christian apologist Tertullian, the well-educated Roman who, after he converted to Christianity, said, "What does Athens have to do with Jerusalem?" Clearly, Athens has come down to us as a symbol of what I guess we can call pagan culture without offending anyone, as Jerusalem represents Judeo-Christian learning. They do come together thanks to Rome, as a dear friend of mine just got back, so she knows all about that. We know, in effect, that these two cities, Athens and Jerusalem, go down in history because of their enormous influence. Here we are concerned only with political developments in Athens and how it became a democracy, sort of. I don't want to push it because so many people have so many different ideas of what a democracy is and should be, and perhaps it's still evolving even now. Whatever environmental conditions may be affecting the sites you see here, and I'm sure this is a very old photograph, and the Greek government and others are very worried about these remaining parts of Athens. We do know that it represents, to many of us, not merely an artistic wonder, but also, of course, a foundation of this kind of democratic government and the idea of what Athens has come to represent to us. Historically speaking, when the Greeks finally came together as a nation in the 19th century, as in Goodbye Turks, there was no question about what was going to be the capital. You know, there are other great cities in Greece, but I think for the purposes of getting a capital of the new nation, that Athens was the clear favorite, just in terms of what had happened over the centuries and what it represents. I've always said to my students over the centuries of teaching that I'd say, you know, Athens is a lot like New York City, and hope to goodness they would know what I meant. Because, you know, and not get the look like, huh, do we have to know that? You know, that kind of, yeah, is that going to be on the test? Because the idea of this enormous mixture of peoples and cultures that Athens came to be, and it's so diametrically opposite, don't you think, to that of Sparta, where even a Greek who had a strange accent would get the look, and you know where you are, how long are you going to be, you know, that kind of thing. Whereas Athens is so very different in so many ways, as we will see. There are many other major centers of civilization. To the fans of Corinth and Thebes and the rest, I want to say a word that you played a role too. But let us recall that this was the center. And very much like the international people that flocked to New York, the people of that day flocked to Athens. And so many of the people we will be discussing in terms of classical civilization will merely be residents of Athens, but not citizens, which I think is very interesting. The fact is, they're not from there. They are not citizens, but that doesn't matter. They're a part, or want to be a part, of that world, and that's very significant. In subsequent weeks, we're going to talk about the Persians and their role in Greek history, which I think is very interesting, because I feel like the existence of the Persians was an important factor in kind of creating that sense of Greekness, if you will. And it's more Athens that wanted to stand up against them. Of course, our accounts are from Athens. We'll talk a lot about Herodotus and his account. On the other hand, since the Persian Wars played such a major role in classical Greece, we have to give a lot of credit to Athens and its role in just terms of leadership. Sparta did not exclusively fight Athens. Sparta had other states that it feared at times. That's okay. Athens became the big one. In another lecture, we'll talk about when the two of them came at each other, the Peloponnesian Wars, and decided this country is not big enough for both of us. And so they had to have it out in those Peloponnesian Wars. All of that says that Athens militarily, politically, culturally played an overwhelming role in the development of classical Greece. I'm always careful to say an early and important form of democracy, because some people will contend that there were other democracies, other forms of democracy in ancient times. However, I will add that this is the one most of us know about. So for the also-rans, that's nice. But Athens is the famous one, and it is the one that most of us know about, even though it's quite different than we think of a democratic regime being, as we shall see. Where do we get our history? Well, think P, the big Plutarch, yes. He comes through again for us. You would think all of the histories that must have been written, they're all gone. people like Plutarch, and Plutarch lived in the 1st century after Christ, must have taken all of these sources and put together his account. He was Greek, but living in the Roman Empire. And so much of our information, and much that you could read in the textbook, or much you may have read in the past, is strictly from Plutarch. So it's kind of interesting how long it takes to get all this information simply because so many of the early sources have been lost. Now, obviously, next time we will be using the great founders of history, Herodotus and then Thucydides. But right now we're still dealing with biographies. And these by Plutarch, talking as he did in the Tales of Sparta about the supposed founder of the Spartan military, Lycurgus. And now we'll talk about important people from classical Athens and their role. Now, the clear point going back into the period, as you know, of the Mycenaeans, and Athens was Mycenaeans, and it had a monarch, and the monarch had lots of nobles surrounding him, and according to tradition, they participated in the Trojan War way back when. So all of that's fine. But getting into the realm of what we actually know, that is, as in using linear B or that kind of thing, that these folks were not Dorians. And Dorians are what were less civilized Greeks that had taken over Sparta and other places. Is that going to make a difference? Well, you can judge that. Suffice it to say that Athens and some others, Athens wasn't the only one, remained Mycenaean and presumably maintained that tradition, that culture, whereas Sparta discarded it. If it did so, it definitely maintained a sense, I would call, of advancement, because like other people, they were land hungry. While the state of Sparta would be a predominantly agricultural state, and their helots or serfs would provide the food for them. It was different in Athens. Oh, they had peasants, all right, plenty of them. But even with folks working in agriculture day and night, they still couldn't provide for their people. They turned to a lot of importing and trading. But they also try to acquire the land around them. And we call those lands Attica. So when you are talking about Athens and Attica, you are talking about how Athens expanded and took over all the lands around it. And so I guess you talk about the way we speak of Metro Atlanta or the greater Atlanta area. You remember how I told you that boy said he's from Atlanta? I said, no, you're not. Gwinnett County, indeed. And he, and then, of course, he admitted the truth. I knew I could drag it out of him, but Atlanta, probably never been on Peachtree Street, but those folks out there, they put on airs. Anyway, I wasn't going for that, believe me. But that's the thing about Attica. They gradually were brought in, I'm sure, kicking and screaming, but they were brought in, and it was essential. Now, this is nothing like Sparta taking over all of the area of Messenia, nothing like it, because Messenia was a whole no, the state that they took over in Sparta. But this is sort of the area around Athens, and it would, in fact, create more lands for the farming, although not more land for the grain. Most of the land, they tell us, was good for olives and wine production. Nice products, but mostly for exports. So, luckily, Athens is near the sea because they're going to spend a lot of time on it. Lots and lots of international commerce, and that's a factor too, being cosmopolitan and getting out amidst people as opposed to Sparta, that having outsiders around is a very strange phenomenon. In Athens, not at all. The monarchs, as you see, ended in the 7th century. A monarch, you can even say the big chief, head of the tribes. You know, if you want to get down to it, when I think of monarchs, I think of thrones and velvet or something of the sort. So I try to say, he just, head honcho and let it go with that. And I think it was not done in an unpleasant way. No Tsar Nicholas II or William II moving to the Netherlands, nothing like that. This is all about simply maybe a retirement, golden parachute, spending more time with the family, whatever. We just don't have a king anymore. It seems unbelievable, but it seems that worked for them. Again, details are sketchy. I know you're not surprised. The heads of the tribes then took over, and that's what they call, that's our rule of the aristocrats. Again, I don't want us to think about people coming to a harpsichord concert. These people who are heads of these tribes are probably pretty rough folks. But they're heads of the tribes, and that, anthropologically speaking, is the nature of these primitive societies. So I think they've got everything going for them in terms of, you got the right blood, and so you rule the roost. So that is the aristocracy. Now, some of the names and groups are important, and it's very Greek because in a certain way, the Spartans have a not dissimilar form. You have executives called archons, and then you have what's called an Areopagus, literally field of Mars, or Ares, and that consists of ex-archons. They're an upper house, and they're the archons who are executives. Remember, we don't have one. We want a group of them so that nobody will get out of line. Now, these archons then become, I guess, archon emeritus, and then I know. And so you can sit around and gripe about all the things they're doing now. It's all going downhill, that kind of thing. It's great fun. Yeah, that is what this Areopagus, which is really the ruling body, because it's an aristocracy. After all, these folks are, big, these ex-archons. Because you come up and say, well, I'm just an Athenian, but I'd like to run. Folks are saying, well, you crazy, you just don't know how things work. Finally, there is, yes, the ecclesia. Get that word for Christian historians. It means the large assembly of male citizens. You say, wow, how democratic. Not really. Sparta has that too. Y'all all come, and then they say, well, the Areopagus decided this. Now, what do y'all think? They said, we agree. We need to get back to work anyway, you know, it's wine time. So, all of that then means that there's nothing untypical about this particular formation. But it will be important as democratic reforms come about. Now again, part of it may have to do with the relative cosmopolitanism of Athens and this enormous, I guess we could say, international population of people who are not from Athens who will come to live there for commercial reasons. In any event, it is a large population, and I suspect Athens, like many other Greek city-states, was very involved in colonization movements that had gone on, as we've already seen, in the earlier periods, because there's just not enough land for everybody who might want to farm or whatever. In any event, here is the layout. You see where Athens is, you see where Delphi is. The area where Athens is and the area right above it, that's Attica. And I believe I have a map later on which will show you where the Eleusinian mysteries are held. If you remember that, that was the cult that celebrated the coming of spring when the queen of hell comes back to be with her mother, who's the goddess of agriculture, and she gets away from that mean old husband. And so it's springtime, yeah. So Persephone, if you recall. In any event, this map will just show us, and we'll use it again, but at the present time, just note where Athens is, and again, its proximity to the Mediterranean Sea, as opposed to Sparta. It just, they have such a different character, such a different agriculture. So much is different. Sure, we're all Greeks, but there's still a world of difference as they evolve. Here's my map. This is the one I wanted you to see. The area of Attica may seem exaggerated, but it's clearly meant to emphasize Greece alone and let you see the area and the significance that it had. Now you go north of Coos to Delphi, which is an interesting place you might want to see. But in general, Attica becomes highly significant for Athens, particularly on the occasions when people may try to invade Athens. But at this point that we're talking, nobody much wants to take over Athens or wants to rule over Greece. They're more or less able to lead their own Hellenic lives without any particular interference by any other peoples. Sanctuaries are interesting. If you remember from last week, we mentioned a famous Spartan figure who got out of line. His name was Pausanias, and he got big ideas. And the Persians floated a proposal that they could marry the king's daughter off to him, and offering him the filth of lucre and jewels and all the rest of it, and maybe make you honorary Persian or something like that. And he got the big head. And finally, when the Spartans realized what he had become, they were out to get him, put him on, 10 most wanted Spartan lists, So he got into a temple, and that's what we mean by sanctuaries. And he stayed there for a long time. I bet he got hungry. And he finally left and died. He left before he died. Because he didn't, I think he knew, it was coming. It was coming for him. And so he didn't want to do it in the temple. That's very respectful. So, but that's the idea of the sanctuary, just before you run out of breath. So, but that's your sanctuary, and sanctuaries then, as now, have continued, I guess, to be the sources of respect for those. Yeah, I don't know about that now, but it used to be. Times have changed. Yeah. Now, vocabulary, people. Draconian. Oh, we love that. Journalism. Draconian laws, draconian records. I always think of Athens. How could you not? Because that's the derivation of the word. Draconian meaning harsh. Draco, again, gets about a paragraph in Plutarch, so it's not like we know about Draco's home life and what sort of hobbies he had, anything like that. What we do know is that he was an archon, and he was big on when people do bad things, they really need to be punished. And so he issued, forgive me, draconian laws, which in essence said, for the least kinds of offenses, you will be severely punished, and that will help you remember for the next time. Significantly, because it did not survive him, draconian laws were written down. So that's the significance, actually. As we will talk about in the future about Romans, one of the major innovations is the idea of written law as opposed to what they used to call the law of the ancestors. So in the past, it was sort of like, well, let's see, let me think now what that law was. Oh, yes, now I remember. So that kind of makes you nervous if you get in trouble. I mean, it would be nice to have something written down so that you can't just make it up as we're going. So, draconian law is not very humane. I think that's the nicest way to put it. Like, think shoplifting, you won't be shoplifting anymore without a hand because you can't pick up anything. Yeah, that'll show you. You say, but that's minor. Yes, but it's to help you remember. See? So you'll be better next time. You didn't need that extra limb anyway. You just behave yourself. So that is the famous Draco, and you notice the date. His period, this would be early aristocracy, I would think, because he's one of the archons. Well, obviously, this was too severe, so we are told the Athenians could not stand it. They knew that times were changing, but they didn't understand how to deal with the problems. The problems of differences between people, groups of people, tribes, power struggles. In other words, Athens, they tell us, was in a lot of internal trouble. So what do we need? We need a great leader. And yes, we're going to get one. Solon. You know, at one time, and I remember this time, we used to have leaders that were called Solon. Do you remember that? It was in the paper. So-and-so was a Solon, the Senate. Those were the golden ages, folks, and I'm glad some of us can remember those times. You youngsters, you know nothing of this, but this was, so you can read about it in a history book. But that word came to mean a true sage who was a legislator. It does not mean, however, and I want to emphasize this, it does not mean a Democrat, little d. He is in no way Democratic. No way. He is, however, someone who is prepared to make concessions to bring about a more stable society and a good government. So that's the way I always explain. Fascinating individual, gets a very good write-up in Plutarch, as you can imagine. So, in terms of rating the greatest classical leaders, he's one of them. You'll notice the canceling of debts, and you can just imagine how that would excite people. And you say, well, is that going to be good? Well, I guess that depends on your point of view, whether you are the person who owes or the person to whom is owed. It is a concession to reality, however, because what had happened in the years was so many small farmers had continued borrowing in order to maintain a life in agriculture. And you know how it is, you just keep borrowing and borrowing. And for many people, it had gotten to the stage that they had actually put their own children or families up as collateral. Yeah. And so they speak of family members ending up in Egypt and other places, which obviously someone like Solon would consider a disgrace. So, canceling the debts and ending the practice, it is said, and again, we don't know how, but wouldn't it be interesting to know if agents of the Athenian government went to Egypt and other places and was able to somehow get them back, get these folks back. It would be interesting to know, but presumably this did not mean in any way, shape, or form that there was a disapproval of slavery, because there was certainly a lot of slavery in Athens. But it means that members of Athenian families should not be used as collateral, and so that practice was ended. But I think most importantly is the practice of making offices and political clout available to the rich non-nobles. A lot of us immediately think of 1789. Yes. And think about, that third estate. All those rich folks. Because they're going around saying, well, we're good too. Just because we can't get in the country club, we're good too. We're rich. We're loaded. We got those big bank accounts. You can't be so snooty to us because you're poor. And that's true often. A lot of the people who have the power are not necessarily wealthy. And here are these people who are making probably more money in the olive business. Oh my gosh. Who can get enough olive oil, right? And so, salad, yes. And so, all these people, and that, they get where they get hurt. They said, we want to be an archon. We want to be powerful. Well, you can't. Your blood's kind of red. You're kind of a loser. And finally, Solon comes around. Of course, Solon's as blue-blooded as can be. But he realizes rich folks, they have needs too. So how would you all like to be up there with us? Well, maybe. And that's the next thing you know. Some old aristocrat is marrying somebody's daughter. And they probably have, one of these open bars at the reception, and say, it's good to marry these married aristocrats and rich people. But seriously, they do become a major political force, and it does bring them in the fold, which I think is the important thing. How often this happens in history, believe me. They had been shut out in the past, and now he says, come on in. And he welcomes them into positions of political authority, and then the next thing you know, they're marrying us. So we won't need to tell anybody about your parents. You can pretend you're one of us or something like that. But that's the way the mixture of this wealthy element with the aristocratic people. And Solon will make other changes as well. People had actually, this is as bad as the black market in World War II to me, these kind of people that would do this. People were actually making a profit off Athenian grain. I mean, they had very little of it, but even what they had, some people were trying to sell it to other places to make even more money. I'm telling you. The filth of lucre, it goes on and on. I can give you so many examples. And you think, but what about their love of Athens? It does not compare to the love of lucre. And so that's what they're doing. And what he does is basically provide support, encouragement for the growth of the olives and the grapes, and then forbidding all export of grain, which just stands to reason, since they don't even have enough anyway. Presumably those who were caught doing it were heavily fined, because I don't think they had any draconian regulations by this particular time. When he did retire, finally, of course he was a celebrity, as you can well imagine. So he took advantage of his celebrity to sort of go on a Near East tour, visiting courts and telling people how they should be running their governments and that sort of thing. Give off a bit of advice as to how the world should be. We'll come back to Solon and one of his most famous hosts, I'll call him. But a distant cousin named Pisistratus would ultimately become tyrant. This man here, it's kind of interesting. They had developed a practice which interestingly is called ostracism. And again, we just seem like we're having an etymological class, doesn't it? Because this is another term that came down to us. Basically, as Athens becomes more democratic, you'll start looking around at people and saying, they seem like they like power a lot. And then more people begin to say it and say, I think he is power hungry. And so, of course, then the lobby comes out and votes, and the next thing you know, you've been chosen, and not for an award. You leave the country for 10 years. That's ostracism. They basically throw you out, and you just say, folks, it's been real. I'm sorry if there's been any misunderstanding. I want to wish Athens all the best. I'll miss the Chamber of Commerce meetings, but good luck to everybody. And you say, well, where will they go? Went to their estate. Yeah. I mean, these are not folks that say, gosh, I'll miss my work. They don't have work. They're like power people. And they have been ostracized. And when your 10 years are up, I don't know if you get any time off for good behavior, but whenever you can come back, and I don't know if you would feel right going right back into public life, because people say, learned your lesson. But this is supposed to prevent demagoguery. However, in the case of Pisistratus, he is a primo example of early tyrants. He was a cousin. He comes from a really good family. I mean, the same family as Solon, obviously. And he is pledged to love the people. I was telling people last week about a famous Georgia politician by the name of Eugene Talmadge. Used to tell people, you have nobody who loves you, said Eugene Talmadge and Sears and Roebuck. And he definitely got the masses excited. They just thought he was wonderful. This is to say that Pisistratus was able to do the same thing. This is after Solon. Solon must have been on one of his many travels. And in the meantime, this man was able to make himself tyrant. Why were people unhappy? Well, I guess that Solon's reforms weren't considered radical enough. You think, for example, that when he canceled debts, and you know what that means, we start spending again, right? So it's not like, I'm going straight now, I'll never borrow again. That's a dream, that's pie in the sky. And so debts continue to grow and all the rest. And Pisistratus is a classic demagogue in the way that he can influence and excite people with his policies. You'll notice how long he lasted through much of the 6th century. He would take off some little, I call them sabbaticals, when he would sort of say, I need to get away, and we would know that they were seriously considering an ostracism. He would say, I want to get away, and I'll just get back to you all, and I love you all very much, and go big A, you know, that kind of thing. And so then he would come back and re-get his power because the people loved him. Obviously, the ruling classes did not. He's what I guess they would call in a later time a class traitor, as he would be viewed, because he was all about the masses, all about the common folk. He's important to us, though, because without Pisistratus, there probably couldn't have been a democracy. As far as Solon is concerned, he breaks the rule of the aristocracy. We give him that. But I would say that Solon is so far from democratic that we don't need to even say the two in the same sentence. It's very serious to take folks' land. Land in the pre-industrial world was one's chief source of great wealth. And there's no doubt that when he began this practice, and it's this practice of saying, well, now you don't need all that. And these regular folks do need some. And so, in essence, this kind of confiscation is a cry to, the people of Athens. I'm with you, folks. But he creates quite a few enemies in the process. I'm told that you now have 5 minutes of liberty. I would enjoy each and every one. Your time is ticking now. I'm ready. Your 5 minutes is gone. I love to say that. Okay, you have no more time.
No more time.
No. You'll the days of sloth are over. So confiscation of land is always a crowd winner because you say it's going into the possession of peasants who desperately need it, and how often we find in history the story of how peasants, they never get enough. There's an insatiable demand for land because that's how we make a living, and because farming methodology is so primitive, you have the idea that they just wear it out, and it takes a long time to get it back. In any event, this is a source of wealth, and he is winning lots of friends among the masses of people. There's no question about that. And that's presumably the way to stay in, even if you don't get invited to a lot of the nice parties in town. I think, because, I mean, you can imagine people saying, they're not very nice to us, so we're not going to be nice to them. Urban improvements. Oh, yes. Let's make Athens a more beautiful city. And you say, well, I'll be sorry I asked, but how are we going to do this? He said, well, we're all going to contribute to Athenian revenue enhancers. And so we know what that ugly term means. And of course, we know who's going to pay for it. Not your poor little olive folks either. It's going to be you big people. And think about this as a joy to make Athens a bigger and better city. And then, you know, all these construction projects, there'll be something given to the people of Athens in love from their leader Pisistratus. You know, that kind of thing. We're familiar with that particular way of doing. So he's famous for that. I mean, again, God, I just had a Napoleon III flash. Because that same kind of thing, you remember? Public works. Oh my gosh, when we want love, it works, giving folks jobs. So, that was going on. And Thespis. Yes, Thespis. Was there a Thespis? Well, Plutarch says there was, so that's about it. It is, of course, the name from which we get thespian, so we would like to think so. Have any of you ever heard that joke about, what was his name? He was from Florida. George, I think Bob has. Does everybody know about that? Running against Claude Pepper and said, my opponent's daughter lives in Greenwich Village with another thespian. And that worked wonders on the campaign trail in rural Florida. A bunch of thespians in Greenwich Village. Need I say more? So, yes, it is amazing. It is amazing when you think about that. But yes, that story is very famous. I don't know if it's true, but it's very famous. It's a good one. But the idea is, again, the well-to-do are going to be paying for all of this. Like our wonderful building that we're in, look at all the names of people, and we think, well, we're very grateful. But most people do this kind of thing voluntarily, but they have the love of the arts, love of Auburn, whatever it is. In this case, I think Pisistratus and his regime rather insisted upon contributions, because this was a way to entertain the masses. We don't have television, we don't have movies, and so after a hard day of working in the olive industry, I think I'll go catch a play tonight. That's apparently one of the origins of theater. And there will probably, and we'll get to this whole topic later on. But for now, I just think it's interesting that if during this period of Pisistratus, it was part of a way to provide urban entertainment, because they can't go home and read a book, or, you got to have some entertainment. This becomes their entertainment, subsidized by the wealthy, out of a sense of patriotism or a sense of duty, whichever we want to say. But Pisistratus had to have been involved in this because, again, he's tyrant and he has the power. And again, I don't think he's trying, as they used to say, win friends and influence people. I think with the masses behind him, he could withstand the upper classes. That's what we get here. Democracy comes about, however, after Pisistratus. I think it's interesting that some tyrants may have been able to be hereditary. That is, they have Junior there and said, "Now, son, would you like to be tyrant someday?" That kind of, could you imagine on your knees and say, "Oh, you have a lot of responsibilities, but it's great. Power is wonderful, yeah. It's addictive." So, Hippias, who will have Persian connections, will try to maintain his father's position, but he'll be kind of caught up in, just to make it simple, an internal family problem, and he will be overthrown. And interestingly, for next week, guess where he'll go? Persia. And he'll say, "I got a lot of information. You might like it," that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And of course, and they'll say, "Wow, we've heard so much about you. You're one of those cool Athenians. You didn't really call us barbarians, did you?" No, but he goes to the court of the Persian king. He said, "How would you like to be my lackey? How would you like to be one of my consultants on Athenian affairs?" That kind of thing. He said, "Wow, that sounds great." This is that kind of thing that I guess after World War II we would call a quisling, wouldn't we, a la Norway? Because they are running rampant. Spartans and Athenians, you say, "Oh, I'm going to Persia. They love me over there." That kind of thing. They'll give me some money. And that promise will mean that Hippias and the end of the line for the tyrants. Because now one of his enemies and an individual from, as you can imagine, one of the great families of Athens, Cleisthenes, will decide that a necessary jump into democracy is now possible and is the best course of action. So it is he who is the true father of democracy. He is an individual, I think, who's not necessarily democratic in any social sense or any economic sense, but it's going to be political. It's going to be sharing power. If we can do this, then we bring in all Athenians. And if we do this, it will make us stronger in the future. And so he gets called the father of democracy. So you can use that trivia. He is the true father of democracy. At least that's the way the story is told by Plutarch. How is he going to do that? Well, clearly the lower house, the ecclesia, the assembly of citizens, will have the level of power that it has never enjoyed before. As time goes on, and obviously this doesn't happen overnight, but his plan is that the Areopagus, remember that's the body of the elites, that will become, and you know, I got to thinking about the British Parliament today and how those folks in the House of Lords they don't get to do much anymore, you know? I mean, I know it's nice to get to sit there and sit with other lords and ladies, and how y'all doing? How about some tea afterwards? You know, that kind of thing. But I'm thinking, you know, the glory days are long gone. And I'm thinking that was probably true for the Areopagus. More and more power will be shifted to the ecclesia. It gets a little complicated here because Cleisthenes will have to break the control of tribes. Tribes, as I said some time ago, are those basic units by which people are organized. Because they have ethnic ties, they are totally connected, not merely geographically, but by their families, groupings, and so forth. Those ties go way, way back. And they tended to stay within those particular groupings until Cleisthenes comes along, and Lord knows how he did it. It's the same question I had last week about Plutarch's description of Lycurgus. How do you tell those upper-class Spartans? Now, remember, these are your kin, your folks. So we all Spartan. Give him a big hug, you know, that kind of thing. But it's that same thing, breaking down these tribes and creating new tribes based on where you live, which seems odd. But you're to say, well, this is our part of Athens, so everyone in this area, and presumably you've got rich folks and poor folks and middle folks who all live in certain areas, and all of this must have been plotted out. But there's also another interesting difference. Athens, including all of Attica, would have had different geographical areas, and, you know, like along the coast, along the plains. And so some people, I don't know who, would have worked out that some of the areas would have included, a tribe would have included this area and that area. I guess we would call it sort of, what's a good term, Bob? Apportionment. So many of this, so many of that. The complexities of it are amazing. And how well it worked in telling folks, I mean regular folks, tell them, guess what tribe you're going to be a part of? You know, that kind of thing. You're wondering, everybody's really excited. The last time I looked, folks didn't like a lot of change. I don't know. Maybe I was wrong, but my sense is that he must have been disturbing patterns, but somehow creating 10 new tribes based on the areas, particularly down to what were called demes. The local area or precincts would be the geographical basis for this democracy. In other words, he felt like until I can break down the family units, the tribes of tradition, I can never get participation. Because there's always going to be some big person telling them what to do, you know, the local boss, that kind of thing. So you're having then to create a new way. And Cleisthenes, if you'll forgive the word, seems to have had the charisma to have been able to bring this off. With some encouragement, no doubt. And lots of the big folks probably giving him a very hard time. Because you can imagine, a lot of people in the Archon did not want to be treated as sort of an old relic or something of the sort. But, meanwhile, people elected to this ecclesia are now the representatives of the people. And they are the ones who are going to have the power. Okay. Here is the way it worked in general. And I might say that if you do follow this in the book, you see, you have it there, Susie, page 191. Right there. You're going to have a nice chart which can explain this to you in a graphic way so that if this doesn't make sense, which I well understand, that this will give you another way. Within, and you got to think about all these people. And I wonder, I believe the figure is given that there were 400,000 Athenians, which is an interesting idea. They don't have a lot of demographic works from ancient times. But however large the population was, maybe a tenth of the people were in this assembly or ecclesia. They are Athenian citizens. Everyone else would have been too young, meaning below 18, or they would have been women, they would have been, slaves. I just thought I would get by that one and kind of slip that in and then move on quickly. And the slaves, women, foreigners, who are called medics. So you keep on chopping down and you realize it gets smaller and smaller. But from the least of these men, the least, they are citizens, and therefore they can be members of this ecclesia. From that ecclesia and the 10 tribes, they will choose 50 of the individuals to act as part of what's called a boule. And this boule is acting as an executive body. And you think, 50 folks? Boy, I bet there's a lot of fussing. And who really knows what's going on? Yeah, that's another interesting question. I think very interesting. But it doesn't go on a long time. You know, it's so many days. They're there. They're chosen from the 10 tribes. Presumably, everybody gets together, and they're chosen for this boule. And each tribe, prytany they're called, will then choose them. The rest of the populace doesn't participate. I mean, that's just as simple as that. Nobody can crash in or say, well, I'm really from Sparta, but I really love y'all a lot, so I'd like to attend the session. But even with just 40,000, that's still a lot of people to attend meetings, and you say, wow, I think that would get out of control, until you think of reality. And the reality is, you don't get paid for this. You do it because you're a good Athenian. And so if you catch people, you catch people on the street say, yeah, I want to go to the theater. heard about Thespa's new production, and you say, yeah, but we got a meeting this afternoon, and you say, oh man, I don't feel well. That's like some of my slothful students. I mean, oh, my health is failing. If there's a drop of rain, they're so afraid, they're so health conscious. It's beautiful. Anyway, the idea being that nobody can make you go, and it is voluntary. So I imagine many people playing hooky. I mean, you're not going to get a gold star or said, I attended the most meetings, I love Heart Athens or something like that. If you don't really understand, think about jury duty, okay? Ugly, huh? Yes. If you had to work for those folks and then listen to people come up with stories, it's something. And I'm sure many didn't come because they have to make a living in this case. Because you can imagine going to your boss and saying, I've really got an important boule meeting this afternoon, so I'll do even more with olives tomorrow. But I don't think that's going to help us today. So that is a major issue. It had to have been in terms of attendance. Theoretically, however, all men citizens are part of the assembly, and they are theoretically in charge of the government, and that's why some people call it a pure democracy. I would think by the standards of 20th century, it wouldn't be so pure, since no woman is a member. And of course, remember, you've got an enormous slave population, as well as the people who are called medics, and they are a large population of foreigners. Now, again, this populace provides people with a constant changeover of leadership and opportunities for individuals to become personally involved. And I guess that would have to do with whether you wanted to. Because I'm sure, as today, there were plenty of people who could care less. They just enjoyed the advantages of living in Athens, but they didn't want to have any part in the difficulties and burdens of leadership. But if you did, by being part of this boule in your time, then you would have the opportunities. You just can't imagine the amount of bureaucracy and all of that. Because I was talking to the person in charge of jury duty one time, and I said, my, what a challenging and interesting job you have. And she looked at me in a funny way, which was not loving. I thought, God, it's got to be a pain. I mean, to do that kind of work. But somehow this must have been worked out so that people would have these opportunities to serve in leadership roles. And again, how many people didn't want it, and how many people took it but were not particularly good at it. It would be interesting to know, but we assume there were many. The opportunities about being chairman would be literally for that day. And it was a constant thing. You didn't take off. Government doesn't stop. We know that in modern times. And it didn't in Athens either. So this might be your big day in your particular tribe when it came its turn to serve as leadership in the boule. Very complex system, and I do recommend you look at that chart on 191 so you see how it was distributed. It's masterful. If he did it himself, Cleisthenes, or if others did it on his behalf. And you better believe somebody couldn't just sit down and just say, this is the way it's going to be, everybody get your place. This had to be a gradual process. But Cleisthenes was chief archon and leader of Athens for quite a time. Meanwhile, always there were individuals lurking around who wanted to be the new Pisistratus, always dreaming of, I can make you new opportunities if you'll just entrust yourself to me because I love you very much. And, that kind of thing. And folks can sometimes really eat it up. Finally, of course, the greatest of all. Pericles, as you can see from the depiction, is designed as a military figure. By that time, archons were chosen by lot. Just sort of, you throw in your cards and they choose them. Whereas the new deal was the 10 most powerful generals, military. And that's how he became a general. And this descendant of the great families would become one of the most famous of all the leaders of Athens during its glory days. You'll see the quotation from one of the first great historians. Future ages will wonder at us. Now that sounds pretty arrogant, doesn't it? But Athens did not need some sort of boosters at its Chamber of Commerce meetings. I think they were very, very proud of being Athenians. There is no question about that. And if they thought, well, you think we're being immodest? Well, ask the medics. Why don't they go home if they don't like it? They love it here. No one less than Aristotle himself was actually from Macedonia. But we think of many of these people as being Athenians because they stayed there a lot. I guess in modern parlance, they sort of had green cards. And they would get them renewed. In any event, Pericles represents the ultimate in what I call democratic imperialism. That's right. We were just talking about that. Democratic imperialism. We are so happy about being democratic, we want to make you democratic too. And you say, oh, don't be shy. I know you want to be. We can help you. We'll make you like it more, And Athens has quite a record of that, of helping people to become more democratic. Oh, you just don't know. Please let us help you. He is the leader, and he is aristocratic, but he is the ultimate in democrat. He is the man chosen by the people to lead them in their struggles in the Spartan period. And he is the beneficiary, you might say, of the changes made by Cleisthenes and other Democrats. But again, I think it's interesting to always be aware that he may be a symbol of that democracy, but he was hardly a man of the people. Ancient Abe Lincoln, he's not. He truly is part of the most blue-blooded people in Athens. But he has the charisma, he has the leadership. His future will not be bright. He will die of the Black Death during the war, which is somewhat ignominious, considering he was a leader at such a great time in the period, but there you are. His position, as I say, was the strategoi. They were generals, but I'm not sure it was a down-the-line military job because it entailed as much as military, civilian leadership as well. And there were 10 of them, but obviously there were 12 people in the Committee of Public Safety during the terror. But everybody knows Robespierre, but I challenge you to name the other 11. It's like some stand out, and obviously this one stands out a lot, Pericles. He, again, really embodies democracy at its best and worst, and that he becomes a leader. He has much support and admiration. His words, upon which it is said that Lincoln based his Gettysburg Address in 1863, when, as you may know, Pericles spoke to the parents of Athenian soldiers who died fighting Sparta. Much of his heroism, his skills as leader are sort of overshadowed when we think about the fact he led Athens into this horrible war and tragic defeat by Sparta. Now, I just can't resist Aspasia because you think, I know, and you think about Spartan women out there doing intramurals, involved in athletics and all that, and that's great. But no Greek woman, Spartan or Athenian, a respectable one that is, ever spent much time in public unless she was a special friend of Pericles. And you're saying, special friend? Didn't he have a wife? Oh yeah, but she's at home. She's got a busy schedule. Okay, doing what? Oh, children, keeping the house nice. I don't know. But what is Aspasia? Is she working on her house? Windex, Pledge? No. She's out there with the men folks. And she is a fascinating figure that she could come there and, because it's like she was in a whole other world of female freedom to hang out with men, and not in a bad way because she was involved with Pericles, a special friend. Shall we say, a gal pal, as they say in those lurid newspapers. But this is more or less a very interesting figure in classical history because, and she spoke up, and Pericles and other prominent Athenians. It is remarkable to me how she has made it in the annals of history. Because you think, well, what about Pericles' wife and family? But we know about her, so there is something to be said for being unconventional if you want to make it into the history books. And in the who's who of ancient Greece. So this particular individual attended, and symposia can get very, very rough because there might be heavy drinking and a bit of debauchery. So you say, well, that's nothing for somebody respectable. And that's why you have somebody like this. We will start on the Persians next time, and I'll look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you.